Good afternoon, my name's Cori Stewart. I'm an Associate Professor at Creative Industry. Some of you won't actually know me yet. I'm going to talk today with my colleague Professor Greg Hearn about our interest in embedded creatives and also the importance of embedded creatives in our increasingly digital economy. I'll spend some time also sharing the work that we've done within the manufacturing sector. For those of you who've already following the work of Stuart Cunningham and Greg Hearn, you might also already know that the digital creative services are growing at almost 3 times the rate of the overall workforce, attracting 30% above the average Australian wage. That's 30% above the average Australian wage. They are in high demand and they're highly paid. So as our digital economy expands, so will the demand for these services. And this is what we're seeing now in manufacturing. So in manufacturing, you might also agree that design more broadly has always been an important part of manufacturing. And you might also consider the craft, that's the tacit skills of manufacturers, as applying some form of creative skill. So what we are seeing is that creativity is the new black in manufacturing. So what we'd like to discuss with you today is how creativity is part of reducing the negative impact of digitisation on manufacturing. It's part of keeping highly skilled workers local, and it's about improving the competitiveness of manufacturing, but also allied industries, such as construction and medical devices. So some might actually wonder why we'd use creative industries to frame this conversation, because it's about innovation and economic development, especially in the absence of, in Australia anyway, a creative industries policy mandate. When actually, the point worth making is that creative industries has never been so important. Creative industries has helped us understand the skills that are needed in other industry sectors and the outcomes that creatives can deliver into other industry sectors, like manufacturing. It's here that creative industries is realising its outcomes through the industry policies of these other sectors. And it will be innovation policies, economic development policies, social policies. This is a really important piece of work. Now, creative work is also important because more than other work, it has value that's irreplaceable, that is non-substitutable by forms of automation. Now, this has made creativity now a sort of central plank to the now widespread research and public debate about the future of work. So to unpack these definitions, Greg will now share with you some definitions and trends around creative work.
Thanks, Cori. We have been tracking the creative workforce now for 4 census periods in Australia and around the world. That work has been taken up, and so we're just in the process of doing the analysis on data that pertains to the 2016 census, where we see these trends have been continuing strongly. So the way that we analyse this is we make a distinction between occupations on the one hand and industries where these occupations are actually found. So the creative occupations, creative industries occupations, if you like, are there specified. And then where you find them is in different industries. Occupations can be either to do with cultural production. That is the tradition, what most people think of when they think about our creative industries, and what probably most students think about, initially at least. This is the production of cultural artefacts such as songs, novels, films, etc., for consumption by consumers, as in contrast to creative services, which is about our business-to-business services. Again, using the kinds of creative capabilities that both Gavin and Terry have been talking about, but organised in a different way. And those same occupations can also be found in every industry sector right across the economy, and this is what we call the embedded creative workforce. In terms of the 2016 data, this is what we find. And this is a great slide. I love this slide. The trend is getting stronger and bigger. And it's been happening since 2001, probably before that as well. So of all the creative occupations in Australia, 53% of them are actually embedded in other industries. So this is not just people who have creative qualifications, but they're working as support workers. These are actually people working in jobs technically categorised by the Australian Bureau of Statistics as creative occupations. So they might be designers, they might be filmmakers, they might be digital content workers, they might be software workers, they might be creative advertising workers, but they are actually doing creative work, and 53% of them are in industries other than what we think of as the traditional creative industries. Only 16% of our creative occupations that are creative jobs in Australia are actually in what most people think about when they think about, I'm going to have a creative career. That is as a muso or a filmmaker or a TV presenter or a journo or a novelist, etc. And so this are the growth rates as well. So both creative services and embedded creative work are growing strongly. So that's our average growth rate. So every year there are 4.3% more creative services workers in Australia, and every year there are 3% more creative workers embedded in other industries. And every year for the last 5 years, creative occupations in the core creative industries has been shrinking by 1.7%. So that's actually, and that's the first time that has not been stable. Over the previous census, it's been roughly stable. Now it's actually shrinking in the last 5 years. This actually, I think, presents challenges for us to think about, because one of the real challenges is if we're finding that these, if you want to think of them as the core creative capabilities that everything is saying is needed, if that's actually shrinking in terms of a career option for students, then we need to find a way to actually keep funding that core of creative capability. And that actually comes down to the way we think about how we fund all sorts of things in the faculty and how we resource people getting up in front of classes. Because students are kind of voting with their feet. If you look at that data that Gavin was talking about in terms of double degrees and double majors, they recognise that where the action is happening, if I can put it that way. And they're voting with their feet in terms of the way they're setting themselves up to have a life where they can deploy their creative capabilities, but in contexts where there's a demand for them to do the high-value work that they are wanting to do. So this idea of the creative knowledge worker, working in any industry, deploying those creative capabilities, if you like, the key-shaped individual with deep disciplinary knowledge in a number of creative disciplines, as well as the ability to apply that in different contexts. And this is where the jobs are being created, and this is where students are voting with their feet. Cori is now going to talk about what we've found when we've worked with one of our main industry partners, where you see this in abundant evidence every day, which is UAP, where all kinds of creative workers, often graduates from QUT, whether interior designers, IBD, or communication, arts managers, there are all kinds of creative workers there who are working in this manufacturing plant and showing how art plus business can work together, showing how design and art can work together, showing how artisanal and electronic art can work together and be emphasised and valued equally.
So I want to spend a bit of time talking about manufacturing and putting you in my shoes and Greg's shoes for the last little while. And we'll talk about manufacturing trends and some policy imaginaries. And I use imaginaries purposely here because I consider policy like an imaginary. It's a visioning process which a collection of people have committed to, but may not, in fact, be the future that we're heading towards. So first of all, I want to talk about 3 manufacturing trends that have been shaping the work we've been doing. I'll go through them in order. So the first one is mass customisation. In manufacturing, there's a real shift between mass manufacture to mass customisation. And this has really been driven by the affordances of technology, but also people demanding personalised objects, more individualised objects. Obviously, fashion items are a big one. Now, And you want to also think about medical devices, particularly one example that we've been working with around making stents for your heart artery. These stents need to be individually made for your body. So this is a trend of mass customisation. The other trend is onshoring. So as technology becomes more adopted in manufacturing businesses and the rise of wages in other countries that have higher manufacturing output, such as China, we're seeing a trend towards manufacturing becoming local. So it's being produced where it's going to be consumed, and particularly evident for industries where the cost of shipping is very, very high. The other characteristic of manufacturing I'd like to talk about is really about the business profile. And this varies quite largely across different countries. They may have different industrial policies. So I'm going to just talk about Australia. 95% of manufacturers in Australia are SME companies. In Queensland, it's 99.5% of companies are SMEs. And of these companies, the vast majority are small companies. So it really makes us question, why is the government now investing so much in manufacturing policies, especially when manufacturing itself has been in decline for over a decade? It's pointing to the fact that manufacturing, particularly advanced manufacturing, is considered very much a backbone industry going forward as something that other knowledge economies can benefit from. It's also pointing to the fact that SME companies can take that kind of high value, highly skilled workforce that's in Australia and apply it to niche markets and can access global markets. There is an opportunity. I would say the race is on in terms of manufacturing policy. Most countries, particularly major, larger countries, now including Australia, have what they call an Industry 4.0 strategy. This is really about describing the digitisation of manufacturing as the next big wave of industrial transformation. I'd actually like you to attempt to read that tagline on the policy, and I'll come back to you. I'll give you a moment. So it's a bit complex, but you're probably realising it's IT systems connected with physical systems that are across the whole manufacturing process, and preferably with no humans. Now, this is one sort of aspiration of manufacturing that's quite viable and important for some manufacturing organisations, perhaps particularly the large mass manufacturers trying to pivot themselves to mass customisation opportunities. But what we've noticed is it's not the only model. There's a certain model that's doing quite well in terms of business. It's just less evident in the policy structures. So this other approach we're calling design-led manufacturing. Now, design-led manufacturing is more about the human-centred, or it takes a more human-centred approach to technology adoption. And digital transformation is focused on enabling the manufacturing operator to do their job better. So they're taking many of the same technologies that would be part of an Industry 4 process, components of it, and they're applying it really to the skilled workforce. Where can we improve it? Where can we get the wins? So often in a design-led manufacturing process, technology is adopted to take out the dull, the dirty, the dangerous work, but it's also there to augment the skilled manufacturing operator to do their job better. And design-led manufacture is highly suitable to this sort of mass customisation trend, and also an adoption strategy many SME companies take, because it takes a sort of a staged approach to investment. Now, UAP, who, if you don't know them, they were previously called Urban Art Projects, that's where the acronym comes from, and they've been our research partner. They're an example of design-led manufacturing. This is their brand. They call themselves explorers, creatives and makers. And again, it's useful just to have a quick read of the quotes underneath there. It explains really how their manufacturing operators perceive their work. So you could probably say that UAP takes a very artisan approach to manufacture. And it really probably suits us in the creative industries to think about it as art and design. It's a very strong overlap. But certainly it's not only art and design companies that are kind of design-led companies. And this is where our work has great transfer across the manufacturing sector. We like to think of a few examples. Those who expertly package fruit and vegetables for high niche markets like airlines. They've got to use some of the same capabilities in manufacture that's design-led. Like we already gave the example of medical devices. So talked about the heart stent, but it could be prosthesis, very individualised objects. It could be, again in that sector, developing a joint replacement for your hip or your knee or whatever you need. That's an individualised process. So we use many of the same sort of technologies, and it's a design-led process. You could also think about the kind of consumer market there, and if we just jump to Italy for a moment, you can think of Ducati being like that. So in Ducati, they have a craftsperson who sees a bike from the beginning right through to the end, and in their marketing terms, that person is, putting the soul in the bike that arrives in the hands of its owner. But you can also think of fashion items there too, like the high-end dress wear of Etro or Gucci, who recently onshored to take kind of control of their brand and use a more design-led process. So we could sit here and we could think of many more, but that just gives you a taste of this other kind of approach to manufacturing. That leads us to our design robotics project. I'm one of the chief investigators on that project with my colleagues here, some of which are here today. This is where UAP partnered with QUT to really transition themselves from being a traditional manufacturer to an advanced manufacturer. It's a 5-year project. It's worth $8 million. It has 3 main threads of activity. It has robotics, which is particularly about robotic vision. It's allowing a robot to see and make decisions and then sequentially be able to work on different objects at a time and do that efficiently. It's got design, which is about making technology easy to use and part of the workflow. The design aspect is also about ensuring the aesthetic qualities and the kind of functional outcomes are a high standard. So we have high value outcomes there. And it has an open innovation network, which is about making sure that the technologies and the processes that are accomplished through this research project are diffused across manufacturing and across industry more broadly. So what we're witnessing here is the first project that UAP onshored to Australia. It was a production of a bird called Pole, an artwork by artist Emily Floyd. They were able to save 800 man-hours in labour, manufacturing floor labour, by adopting these digital and robotic processes, and therefore they could manufacture them here in Australia. So you saw the robot create the cast moulds, and now you're watching the aluminium pour in the foundry that's going to create the shell of this bird. So it's our pleasure to share our interest in embedded creatives and some of the work we've been doing in manufacturing. To conclude, I think what we'd like to say really is the creative industries is going to play a significant role as our economy becomes more and more digital. There are opportunities for creatives and creative industries research in other sectors like manufacturing and non-creative sectors, and there's an opportunity to take a leadership role in that change process. Thanks.